Okay, we'll start because I'm just so thankful that you're here, Savannah, with two sick kids at the house. I appreciate you greatly. I've known you for many, many years. I haven't seen you in a while, so this is a treat to see your face. But I think back, we've gone shopping in Sochi at the Olympics. We've gone on a tour of the Universal lot and broke into the Will and Grace set on a golf cart. And that's just scratching the surface. But there's many people listening all around the world right now. If you don't know, the Today Show is over 70 years old. Savannah is the top dog there. She does an incredible job. She's a busy mom, a busy wife. And I'm so thankful that you're doing this. But yet in the middle of this crazy thing called life, you decide to write a book about your faith.
Yes.
What were you thinking?
I don't know, Jason. I mean, no one is more shocked than I am that I wrote a book about faith, but I did. And I'm so glad I did, but I didn't know that that's how I would feel a year ago when I was just starting to write and starting to think about this. And I've been asked a lot, especially because, my faith has always been important to me, and you have known that as my friend, and all my friends and family know that about me. It's impossible really to spend any time together without it coming up because it's so central to how I see the world and what's important to me. But, it's not like I was out there talking about it all the time, not because I was afraid to, but just because, it just didn't come up. And so to kind of put it out there, to me, if you're going to write about your faith, if you're really going to write about your faith, it's like putting your heart on a piece of paper and then inviting the world to look at it and have whatever reaction to it they may have. And that's totally terrifying. But it's been, in the end, a really beautiful and life-affirming, touching experience to hear how people have responded to the book and responded to the message. And, it's not really about, me or my story, because it's really not a book about me, weirdly. I mean, it's a book about God and what I figured out over the years so far about this God that I know. And, it's good news, this God that we know, so it's been really fun to share that.
It's called Mostly What God Does. This is usually the point in the interview where I would hold it up. I've been reading it, but God bless my mother. She was here the other day, and she just took it with her back to Florida because she started going crazy over it, and she was 7 or 8 chapters in, and that's what a lot of people are saying. I think at last check, it was on the New York Times bestseller charts at #1 for like 8 weeks. Is that correct? Something like that?
I've been so lucky. It was #1 on the charts for a couple weeks, and then it's still in the top 10. So
Jeez.
It's been on the bestseller list for, I think, 10 weeks now, which just blows me away. Yeah. Because honestly, I didn't really think about that, but I also didn't expect it to be, because again, it is a book about faith, and I've just been so touched by it. And I just think it speaks to the message. It speaks to how compelling our God is. And that's why I think people are responding to it.
What was the inspiration behind the title, Mostly What God Does? And what has God been mostly doing in your life?
Yeah. Well, I wish I had thought of this line. It's not original. Mostly what God does, the rest of the sentence is love you. Mostly what God does is love you. And it actually comes from the Bible, a retranslation of a verse in Ephesians by this scholar named Eugene Peterson, who wrote a book called The Message, which is a retranslation of the entire Bible from English into essentially plain English. He had this revelation that, Jesus actually spoke in not some educated or posh dialect, but in this common conversational street language of his day. And so on that basis, Eugene Peterson decided to retranslate the Bible into not slang, but kind of a conversational, earthy,
easy to digest for me.
Easy to digest. And it's a very fascinating retranslation. Sometimes it's amazing and brilliant, and sometimes you really miss the traditional the beauty of that language. But it's a wonderful tool, and I've turned to it many times over the years. And so that's how I ran across this version of this verse in Ephesians. And it said, watch what God does, and you do it too, the way children learn proper behavior from their parents. Mostly what God does is love you. And when I read that, I loved how clear and clean and spare it was, and how it just boiled it all down to its simplest terms. Not easy, but simple. Mostly what God is doing is loving us. And I think those of us of faith, or even no faith at all, you often kind of wonder and wrestle with this idea of God, and what does God think of me, and what does God think of the choices I've made? Or, am I a good person? Do I deserve forgiveness? Am I, have I just ruined my life or gotten so far off course? What is my purpose? And the answer is always basically the same. Where is God? What is he up to? Mostly what God does is love you. That's mostly what he's doing. Mostly the answer to the questions that we have are in the trajectory of God wanting to be closer to us, wanting to connect to us, wanting to be present to us. That's almost always the answer. Yes, it might vary by the specifics, but generally speaking, it's just the trajectory of love, God coming to us, always wanting to meet us, not waiting for us to get there, but willing to run more than halfway to meet us. And so the book is really a series of reflections about how I came to understand that, and how I lean on that and still need to lean on that. Jason, one of my fears about writing a book like this was, first of all, that, I have no proficiency or special education. I'm not a theologian or a biblical scholar. I'm just a person that grew up and was interested in faith, and from time to time would have moments of devotion and study. And so I knew a few things and had listened to a few things, and, had invested some in my faith, but I have no special expertise. And more to the point, I am certainly and could never and would never try to hold up my life as any kind of model or example of any kind of morality or rectitude or perfection or even goodness, honestly. Like I've learned more about God by doing everything wrong than anything right I've ever done. So these reflections are really about just being kind of a regular person, experiencing life's normal ups and downs, and finding God was there the whole time. And sometimes not knowing that right in the moment, sometimes having seasons, long seasons of disappointment with God, or disenchantment, or just checking out, distraction, being more dazzled by other things, and losing my way. But finding out that no matter, mostly all that time, God was there loving me.
You're sitting here talking, and I kind of just feel like when you talk about God, it feels like I'm taking 3 deep breaths, and it's relaxing, and I feel like you could be a preacher, whether you wanted to or not, because I think so many times, especially in our industry, there is that fear, and you touched on it a little while ago, talking about God, talking about your faith, because people immediately are going to think, and this is me, I don't want to put this on you, I think if I talk about my faith all the time on social media, on the show, in an interview, people are going to think, oh, he's better than all of us. He never messes up. I'm going to wait for him to make a mistake, and then I'm going to pounce. And I know that it was a nerve-wracking experience for you to publicly talk about this. Can you dive into that a little more? I'm not going to ask why, because I get it, but what pushed you over the edge to say, yeah, I need people to hear this?
I had and continue to have all those fears. If you're waiting for me to make a mistake, you don't have to wait. Like, it's every day. Yeah. It's every day that I fall short, and not in just some I was, rude in traffic and hit the brakes too hard. No, in profound ways, I disappoint myself every day. But my faith, and for that reason, I guess I feel that love and grace of God so distinctly, not because it's some distant experience that I once had, but because it's one that I have every day and continue to need and have to remind myself. And, it's like, I've never been afraid. I've always felt like if someone asked me, oh, what drives you? Or what do you think about this? Or what gave you the courage? Or how did you get through that situation? I would always be the first to say, oh, well, honestly, I'm a person of faith, and this is kind of how I think about things. But to put yourself out there like that is so scary, because you do wonder if, oh gosh, now everyone's going to be waiting for me to fall, or, can I just I'm not trying to I'm not trying to hold myself out there as some kind of person who's got it all figured out. I'm not. And the opposite, I'm just like a fellow traveler. So what got me over the fear? I think it's because I had something good to say about God and I wanted to say it. You know, a lot of people have asked me since I've done some interviews about this book, they might say, well, did you feel like, boy, our world really needs to hear this? Or you felt a duty or an obligation? Or maybe you felt like, gosh, you've had some really lucky breaks in your life. Look at you, lucky girl from Tucson, Arizona, from nowhere. And here you are on the Today Show. That's amazing. Did you feel like you kind of owed it to God, you know? Or did you feel like God was putting it on your heart? Now look at what I've done for you. What are you going to do for me? None of that. None of that. And by the way, who responds to something like that? Who would really respond out of a gun to your head? No, it's the opposite. The most amazing thing happened through time in a way that I could have never anticipated. In this most beautiful alchemy of a little bit of time, a little bit of heartache, a little bit of finding out who God is and really feeling that love. I wanted to. Why did I write the book? Because I wanted to. Because I had something wonderful to say about God and it felt good to say it. And how thrilling that was and how passionate I was about just saying it outweighed even my fears, which were and continue to be quite substantial. And that is so cool. Like only God could pull that off. Only God. Because it's not just anybody would be scared. It's also very unique to me. I am so afraid of humiliation. All my life, I've always just wanted to kind of blend in. I know that sounds weird given my career path, and some therapists should really analyze this one day. But honestly, like some of my earliest memories as a young girl, certainly like in junior high and high school and even college, I didn't want to be different in any way. I mean, I even joke about this in the book. When I was little, I hated that my name was Savannah. It was so different. I wished my name was Jenny or Amy or Linda or, you know, Missy. Why couldn't I just be normal? Why did I have to have a different name? I just wanted to blend. I wanted nothing to make me unique in any way. And then later, even as a young girl, and when I would, you know, go to church camp and they'd be like, you should tell your friends about your faith and you should go out there and witness as a verb like that. You know, I didn't want to. And I felt guilty about that and ashamed, like, oh my gosh, I'd rather just, you know, go to the keg party here and be like all my friends. I don't want to be sitting here handing out pamphlets. Like that was uniquely horrifying as a thought to me, to be out there evangelizing. You know, that was the last thing I wanted to do. And so isn't it so funny that 25, 30 years later, suddenly it would come to me that I think I want to write a book and it's going to be about faith. Like only God could have pulled that off. And it was not a sledgehammer, as usual. And you can always, it's the telltale sign of God, I think, of Jesus. Just so gentle, so done out of love, never at the point of a gun, always love. And I think that really, you know, I write about that in the book, actually. There's a chapter called The Fragrance of the Gospel. And it's this idea that, you know, if you can really dip in and soak in and feel that love of God, that suddenly it's something that you are going to want to and will just naturally exude like a fragrance. And it's scripture that uses the word fragrance. It's not the odor of the gospel. It's not the stench. It's not the pungent aroma. It's not the room spray. It's not, this is a good place for a stick up in this nasty room. It's the fragrance, the pleasing, compelling, gentle aroma that comes with you when you've been spending time with someone who loves you and you're tickled by that love and that delight is with you. And, you know, that's what this book, gentle is a word that I use that word a lot, certainly for God, but also I think for this book, it's just a gentle call to be loved and then to go and you love too. And I hope that's why it's been appealing, whether you are a person of faith, a lot of faith, or a person of no faith at all, that it's equally appealing and compelling, because I think that God is compelling in that way.
Geez, everything you're saying is resonating, especially with some things that I experienced growing up in the Southern Baptist Church in South Florida. But when you talk about it now, you just have a sense of gentleness, and it's very refreshing to hear. You mentioned Tucson, Arizona. Savannah never liked her name. Yet I'm curious. I know you said at one point, I watched an interview, God was the sixth member of your family, but you're in Arizona. When did you realize that you had this gift of communication?
Gosh, I don't know. I knew I had a big mouth. I think everyone around me figured that out pretty quick. But I never thought of myself as having really any particular gifts.
You had to stand out because you have this wild gift of communication. Did you realize one day, was there a certain moment, or did you gradually realize, I'm kind of different? I feel like I like being in front of people and talking.
Well, I think everyone around me learned that I was loud and had a big mouth pretty young, but that was not really perceived as any particular gift or skill or talent. I can tell you that. It was more like, settle down. And I didn't really, I didn't think of myself that way. I just grew up in Tucson. I went to college in my hometown, but I did always know that I like to talk. I like to explain things. And I used to, when I was little, think I'd be a teacher because I could always have I had this sort of vision of myself standing at a blackboard and pointing to things and explaining. There was something about that really appealed to me, and it felt good when I was doing it. And so then when I went to college and I started taking journalism classes, I loved to write. That was part of it. And then I worked at a TV station, and I liked to, I started to kind of push to get to do some stories, and I liked to present. And so it kind of happened over time. But I have to say, there was never a moment, especially in those early years, where I felt like I had any particular talent for it. Because frankly, honestly, and this is not just some faux modesty, I actually wasn't very good. Like, I had to learn how to be a communicator and be on television and be a writer. Those were all skills that I had to learn. But I think there was something deep inside me that it gave me great joy, and still does, actually, to be an explainer and a teacher. And I think that's what this book is kind of about too, for me. You asked me why I write the book. It's in the first thing that I wrote in the foreword. I like to talk about that God that I know. I have a big mouth, and I like to talk about that God because this God that I've experienced is so overwhelmingly beautiful. Yeah. Who wouldn't want to talk about that?
It's pretty easy to talk about God, especially all the great things that he's done in our lives. And you have to tell me, I want to ask you more about the Today Show because it's fascinating for me, especially. But when did you decide that you were going to be an attorney, that you could do it, that it was a manageable goal that you just didn't want to do, but you could just thrive in?
That was like one of those moments in life where it kind of came out of nowhere in a way, but also was building over time. So when I was in local news and working some jobs, I started covering trials, and I was really interested in legal issues. And it was actually during the time of the O.J. Simpson trial and the Menendez brothers. It was a time when courtroom television was a big thing, and I was super enthralled with it. So because of that, I started thinking, maybe I should apply to law school. I knew I was in a medium-sized market. I was actually back in my hometown in Arizona, and I was anchoring the weekend news. And I'd been doing it a few years, and I knew that it was time for me to try to move on and try to get that job in a bigger market. That, especially then, that was the trajectory. You would just you'd start in a tiny little market, a tiny little town, at a tiny newsroom, and then you'd get together your tape and you try to get to that bigger town, and then you get to that medium-sized town and you try to get to the big city. And then if you could get to the big city, then maybe you could get to the networks. And that was the path. And it was more or less the only path back then. And so I was sitting in this medium-sized market knowing it was time to try to get to that big market. And there were two things going on. Number one, I was a little burned out and a little tired of local news. I think even more, if I'm honest about it, I wasn't really sure I was good enough to get into that big market. And I just was sort of dreading the idea of sending out those tapes and being rejected and told over and over and over again, you're not for us, you're not good enough, you're not going to make that next step. So my idea was to take the law school entrance exam, the LSAT, and have that in my back pocket. And maybe I would apply to law school if I couldn't get that next job. Well, something incredible happened that to this day I still think is pretty miraculous. I took the LSAT in, I guess it would have been December of 1998. I was still under contract at my TV station. I was supposed to work a year or more still. And all of the law school deadlines lapsed. I didn't apply because it wasn't time to apply for me. I couldn't go. And lo and behold, I got a letter out of the blue from one school, Georgetown Law, which
heard of them
to me and God would have been my dream school. I'd been an intern in college and lived on the campus of Georgetown Law. And I was like, this place is amazing. And I loved Washington and politics. I was a real news nerd. And so this letter comes and said, the deadline to apply to law school has passed, but we received we received your scores and your GPA. I don't know, they get some kind of data, like basic data about you. And we will extend the deadline for you if you apply in the next 2 weeks. So I felt like it was a sign from above. I threw together an application. I sent it out there. It's the only school I applied to. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I got in. Now I had a decision to make. Do I leave? Do I ask my boss to get out of my contract and go to law school that fall? Or do I stay in TV because I'm not sure I'm really done with TV, and let that law school chance go? But I didn't know if I didn't go to law school, would I ever get that chance again at Georgetown Law? And I didn't know if I leave TV, what if I want to go back? Could I ever get back in? And so I was hemming and hawing and not sure what to do. I was, just twisting myself in knots. Should I go? Should I stay? What should I do? And I had a kind of a mentor at the time who listened to me, heard me, heard this anxiety and this loop I was in. What if I this? What if I that? I can't do this. I can't do that. And he just said to me, Savannah, think big. And for whatever reason, that little sentence, I knew exactly what he was saying. It was more than a bumper sticker. It was saying, what do you really dream? What is your biggest goal? What would you really want? And I whispered it to myself. I was too embarrassed to say it to him or to anyone, not even to my mom. To no one would I dare to admit that I kind of thought I'd like to be a legal correspondent on a national network. I wanted to make it to the big time. And for me to even admit that to myself was huge. But once I did, then I knew what to do. Then I thought, well, it would probably be good to have my law degree then. So I think I'll go to law school. And that's how I decided. But I always kept that moment with me, and I've shared it many times with people who are also at a point in their lives where they're trying to make a decision or they're not sure. It was really important to me to admit to myself what my goal was, what my dream was, as absolutely impossible as it seemed sitting there in Tucson, Arizona in that moment that I could ever make it to a national network and be a legal correspondent. That was just absurd. Me, who didn't even think she could get a job in Phoenix, the next big market, let alone the national networks. But I admitted it to myself. And when I did, I knew the next step to take in that direction. And I've kind of kept that with me all my life. And little did I know that my dream would actually be exceeded. That yes, I would get to be that network correspondent and go cover the White House and cover the law for NBC. But that I would even get to be the anchor of the Today Show. Wow. That was even beyond my dreams.
There's so much to unpack there. I like the idea of just saying your dreams out loud. I think that's great advice for people who may be stuck in the middle right now trying to figure out what they want to do next. But boy, did your law degree pay off. It was really cool to see you over the years because I've been watching NBC News for the longest time, ever since I was in high school, and you worked your way up. People need to know, if you're not from America, the Today Show is the staple show. It is a part of American broadcasting history. I used to stand behind the glass at Rockefeller Center with my parents and my aunt. And I always said to myself, man, I would love to be on the Today Show one day. That was the goal for me.
And you were, and you have been.
An amazing time contributing over the years and working with you. And you have to respect the nerves that come along with that job. Every time, I don't care that I've been doing this 20 years, every time I do a live hit, every time I'm on set with you guys, there are nerves that you need to respect because it's a big deal. And of course, after you do it a while, I'm sure it's not every day we're like, wow, but getting that co-anchor chair, I have to know everything about that day. I know there was a migraine involved, but I can't imagine going from where you were, working up the ranks, and they said, you're going to be the co-anchor. That it doesn't get any bigger on the show. Can you bring me through that day?
Yeah, it was so shocking. And, there's a whole history there. And it was a really difficult and controversial time for the network because they made a decision to remove the anchor that had been there. And they ended up putting me in there. And none of this was known to me. I had just arrived at the Today Show and I was anchoring the third hour. And so I was happy as a clam. I mean, as far as I was concerned, this was the height. There was no higher to go. I was anchoring the third hour of the Today Show with Natalie and with Al. I was the legal correspondent. I was in the morning analyzing the Supreme Court and legal cases and at Nightly News with Brian Williams. I mean, this was the dream job. And all of a sudden, one afternoon, I was waiting. I'll never forget it. I was waiting to do my live shot, actually, on a Supreme Court case on Nightly News. And the president of NBC at that time called me down to his office at 6 o'clock. The news goes on at 6:30. I thought it was a little odd. I went down there, and he printed out an article that was just breaking in the New York Times and handed it to me. And it said that the current anchor was exiting NBC, which was news to me. And then he started talking to me about that job. And honestly, Jason, I didn't even know what he was saying. I mean, the first thing I said, well, was that true? Is she really leaving? And he said, yeah. And then he kind of was talking around it, and I know it's difficult. It's not an easy situation, but this is going to, on any other day, we'd be jumping up and down with joy for you. And I know it's so complicated and hard, and then I just finally said, I'm so sorry. And I don't mean to be obtuse, but are you offering me this job? And he kind of smiled and he said, yeah, I am.
Jeez.
And I started to cry. And he said, do you want it? And I said, I don't know. Because of course I wanted it. Of course it was my lifelong dream, actually higher than my lifelong dream. But I also knew that it was a terrible moment for the network and for the show. And it was a terrible time and really the worst possible scenario to be walking into. And I could see it all. I saw it so clearly. I'm going to be a flash in the pan. I'm going to be that transitional figure that gets kicked to the side. They're going to throw me in there. I'll be totally rejected by internally and externally, and then I'll lose everything. And I'm so happy where I am. So I really wasn't sure. I was terrified. And so he said, I promise you, Savannah, I promise you it's going to be okay. And, a few weeks passed and this transition happened and it was time for me to do my first day. I mean, it was so controversial, Jason, that, in the past when there would be a new Today Show anchor, they would throw these big parties and there would be a big news conference and they'd invite all the press and they'd sit in the SNL studio 8H and, there was a celebration. I was announced on a Friday afternoon in a paper press release. Like, that's when you put out the bad news. That's how they said what happened. So it was really a difficult moment. And I didn't honestly feel like I could say no. And I didn't want to say no in the sense of, if I say no, then it'll be someone else. There was no way to turn around what had happened. But at the same time, I really felt like, oh my gosh, I'm sort of the one who's being led here for the big fall. And this is not going to end well for me.
Isn't that amazing where your mind immediately goes negative first? You get the dream job and then you immediately start thinking about all the negative things, all the things that can go wrong. And there's probably more pressure on you in that moment because of the controversy and all the bad things that were happening, which of course is part of television. There's so many highs and lows with shows and people coming and going. We've seen that. But that's even more pressure on you. And you arrive that day to sit in the chair and you get a really bad migraine.
Yeah. I mean, that's the context. Like, I go in there, I know I'm terrified. I feel the eyes of the world on me, but not in a good way. And the morning that I was to start, I came down with a blinding migraine. And the kind of migraines that I can get from time to time are those where you can't see, your vision is obscured and there's like whole sections of your field of vision that are cut out. So it's not just about, could I go down there and tough out a headache?
Can I read a teleprompter?
I can't see the teleprompter. I can't look at the lights. I can't do this. And so I sat down, I laid on the floor of my dressing room with the lights turned out and just laid there and hoped that it would pass. I was chugging water and I took Advil and I was kind of hoping that if I closed my eyes for a few minutes, it would pass. And, the producers and the other anchors are knocking at the door like, hey, the show's on in 20 minutes, in 15 minutes. Are you going to make it? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. And I laid there and I write about this in my book. This verse came to me, a verse that I had learned years and years before, but for whatever reason popped into my head. And the verse was, I look to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And something about those words in that verse comforted me because I knew that I wasn't alone, that it wasn't me against the world. It wasn't. It was me and God. And that he held me and had my hand. And so somehow I went down there. I was able to do it during every piece when they cut away from me or during the commercial. I would put on these sunglasses and just like look down. And I somehow got through that day. And I actually had a series of migraines over the next few days, but it passed, it got better. And I was able to do it. And there were lots of ups and downs in those early years, and not sure. It took me a long, long, long time to feel comfortable and feel like, okay, I made it. I'm not going to be cast to the side. I mean, that went on for years and years. But, in the end here, I'm still here. I can't believe it. 11 years later, I'm still here. Actually, almost 12 years later.
So cool.
And I feel very grateful for that.
Were you ready for that level of attention that comes with a job like that? I mean, you just saw how things ended for your previous, colleague there. It's a crazy business. It changes fast. People are going to want to know more about your personal life, your kids. You're going to be stopped every single place you go, and you won't be able to get away from that for the rest of your life, probably.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of ways you could just never really be ready for that. And look, I'm not Taylor Swift, it's not like I can't walk outside my house and have 100 paparazzi or go to the grocery store. So I have it well in perspective, but I think having a firm foundation and being a little older, I think I was 39 or 40 years old. Maybe I just turned 40, actually. I think I just turned 40 when I got that job. So, I wasn't a kid and I'd been around. I'd worked in news for a long, long time. I had worked in Washington. I had gone to law school. So I had experience and I had a solid foundation in my career. And far more importantly, I had a solid foundation in my soul and in my person. But that said, it was still really hard. And those winds buffeted me many times. And I cried many, many tears. And I would read articles, especially in the beginning, that were devastating to me and broke my heart and made me afraid or embarrassed. And so it's all been a long walk. And, in some ways, I don't think I'll ever be used to that. I think there is a lot that's really fun and interesting and cool and exciting and glamorous about having a job that's in the public eye. There's lots of really neat things about that. But there's also a baseline of stress and fear and anxiety because that at any moment, not only could you fall, and you might fall because you're human, and of course you might fall, but also that when you did, it wouldn't be private, that everyone would know. And that's, one of my deepest fears, actually. And it continues to be. And writing this book, actually, maybe it accentuates those fears. It didn't alleviate them at all. It made the target even greater in my mind, and still does, because it's like, oh, and she thinks she's going to write about a book about faith. Oh, give me a break. So I feel that even more acutely because I know who I am. I know. And I live with myself. So I know how far I fall from any kind of ideal on any given day. I'm aware. And so I think that's what makes my faith so meaningful to me and why I'm so grateful for it is not because I think I have it made or because I think I'm a good person. It's really the opposite. It's because I so deeply feel it and feel grateful for my faith and my salvation and for that love that I wrote about and like to talk about. I need it. I need it every single day. And being in this job and being public and knowing that at any moment something could happen that would be unexpected and terrifying and humiliating and hard, like living with that tension. I couldn't live with it alone. I couldn't live with it if I didn't have that foundation of faith that no matter what happens, yes, even if that happens, I won't be alone and I'll still be loved and God will still be with me. But I really don't want any of those bad things to happen, but I'm always aware that they could. And I don't know if that's something that's kind of unique to my psyche or if that makes me sound like I have some anxiety. Well, I do,
I'm pretty sure
but I'm
we
not
all
a
do.
basket case. Yeah. I'm just like pretty much in touch with my fears and with that other side of life. I'm in touch with it. And because I am, I really do lean on my faith.
I think you have to. I keep thinking about what you were saying a little while ago. I mean, when you get that migraine, you tell us about your favorite verse, and it's a reminder that we're partnering with God. He's in charge, of course, we know that. But if you look at it like, yeah, we're partnering with God. Your gifts are his gifts.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be taken away. You're in that position for a reason. And yeah, nerves are good sometimes. We always are going to get nervous before a big interview, a big moment, presentation, and whatever your job is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That doesn't mean that you're bad at your job. So many great takeaways. I'm curious about those times you're talking about when fear kicks in the most, where you had to hang on tightest to your faith. Do any come to mind that you feel comfortable sharing?
I mean, lots of them. I mean, certainly anytime there's been a big interview and there have been moments where the pressure is on big time, especially around, interviewing presidents or presidential candidates. And in those moments when you really know the whole world is scrutinizing you and ready to pounce, and it's absolutely terrifying and it feels like a dark night of the soul. And I don't ever pretend that I don't have anxiety and fear in those moments. Of course I do. You just do it anyway. And I think that, rather than, it's a long time ago, I just had to start learning that this was who I am. This is my process. And just to try to, if I can't embrace it, just to accept it.
Yeah.
My husband used to laugh, like when I'd fill in for Meet the Press or one of these things, he'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to slide food under the door. She's like Carrie from Homeland, like in there with like, notes and outlines and newspaper articles. And I'm like totally in the zone and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster and I can't do it. And da, 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 da. And this is like who I am. And this is my process. And I've often thought to myself, why can't I just be a little more normal? Like, why can't I be like some of these guys I see on TV who seem not only to always be prepared and so cool as cucumbers, but also seem to enjoy it and are like, hey, let me tell you, and I'm not like that at all. But now I've just come to accept that this is my process. And that process, which looks a lot like anxiety, but is really just hardcore preparation, it has worked for me. And it hasn't prevented me from doing the job ultimately. It has not been a pleasant experience. You wouldn't want to be my roommate during that time not because I actually put it out on anyone else, but just the pure fear and terror and misery that I'm exuding in all directions. The stress that I'm carrying with me is just it's not a happy energy. So you wouldn't really want to be around it. But, it's worked for me so far. So now when those moments come up, rather than being upset that I'm upset or anxious about being anxious, I'm just like, I try to tell myself, well, come on now. This is how it always is. You always think that you're going to screw up. You always think you got nothing good to ask. And it always ends up okay because God always carries you. And here you are again. You have that moment again. And I really feel that way. And again, like not misplaced modesty to say that I feel I have been carried again and again and again in those situations. I really do. And to me, in sometimes miraculous ways, to have survived. And I'm so grateful for that. And I recognize that. It doesn't mean I'm down on myself or I'm like, oh, no, I know how hard I worked. I was there.
Sure.
It was hard. It was miserable. I prepared. I worked really, really hard. But there's an X factor. And for me, that X factor is being carried and delivered even in those really difficult moments.
So whether it's battling nerves and questioning if you're good enough for your job, or back when you were 16 years old and the catastrophic loss of your father from a heart attack, God is still in the middle of all of it. I wonder how you handled the grief of your dad passing away and how it maybe changed your faith, and quite simply, how were you able to move on?
That's one of those things where, my dad, when I was 16 years old, had a heart attack and died. And it was completely shocking and earth shattering. I was a junior in high school. Summer had just started. I was out on a Friday night and I came home and my mom and sister were waiting in the living room with the light on to tell me this news that was completely stunning and shocking. And I remember in those early days, I had friends who said, "Oh, well, what do you now what about your faith? What do you think? Do you still believe in God after this happened?" And I remember saying to them in that moment, "Yes, this is when I need God the most. I can't lose my dad and lose God at the same time. I can't afford it." That being said, I actually think grief is a lifelong process. Like, I think I'll carry my grief as long as I'm drawing breath on this earth. I don't think it will ever be emptied out. I don't think you ever get over it. Sometimes I think of it like a cup of in those early days and or at certain moments, your grief is pouring out in bucketfuls. And then other times as life goes on, maybe it's just a little drip and a dabble here and there, and it will never be emptied out. Your cup of grief will always be with you until you breathe your last. And so my grief has been with me. And as I've carried it, I think sometimes it's been a challenge to my faith, because when something happens like that breaks your heart and stuns you, whether you give word to it or not, it's a breach of trust with God. If you believe in God and you believe in an all-powerful God and you believe in a God that can control happenings here on earth and control life or death, and then you realize that death happened and God didn't stop it, that shakes your faith. It doesn't mean it shakes your faith in whether or not God exists. It shakes your faith in whether or not God is good and whether or not God can be trusted, whether you can give him your heart because you're afraid. What does that mean if I'm vulnerable to you? And so that has been a lifelong journey of coming to understand who God is, how he interacts with the world, what it means to live in a broken world, which is full of injustice, far greater suffering than that I experienced as a 16-year-old girl. That was terrible, and it rocked my world. But I look around at suffering that exists here and in the news and in my friendships and people I know, and it's far worse. And it makes me question, where are you, God? What are you up to? And there are no simple answers, but I try to wrestle with them, because a bedrock belief I have is that God is not afraid of our questions, and that doubt is not the opposite of faith. Apathy and indifference might be, but doubt isn't. That God invites and yearns to engage in these questions, even these hard ones. Even to wrestle with God is an assertion of your faith. It's your faith being worked out into every nook and cranny, not glossing over, trying to believe in some aphorism or having some blind faith or some of these well-meaning phrases that drive me crazy, like everything happens for a reason. Does it? What reason?
Yeah.
What reason could possibly justify this? And what am I supposed to believe about a God? If you're God, you can accomplish that goal without horrible suffering. It's an irreverent thought, but I don't think God is afraid of that thought. And when I have wrestled with those things, I've come to a greater understanding about this broken world that we live in, and that this is not how it ends, that we're in the middle of the story, not the end. And that while we are not promised any particular outcome, and while we cannot ever understand, not in this life anyway, why this world is as it is and why this suffering persists, what we can believe, and this is the leap of faith, is that God has promised that one day there will be no more suffering, and there will be no more tears, and there will be no more injustice. And that's the world he has in mind. And that's the world he's still working for. And that's the dream of God that we're supposed to still be trying to accomplish in our little way. And in our little way means by receiving his love and then sharing it around as little deputies and agents of his love. And that's not going to change everything. And it's not going to change the world. But if we could do it, it might change our little section of the world. And if we all did it, well, we'd be in a much better place. So, wrestling with these questions was probably the hardest part of writing the book. But I believe these are questions that we are meant to ask.
You speak so eloquently in the book and also just right now when it comes to doubt and despair. You see the pain in this world all the time. You report on it so many more times than you want to. We're surrounded by tragedy. And I think I always admire when you're in those moments and how you compose yourself. And I see your heart in your reporting, and that's why you're where you are now. And so many people relate to you and love you on television. But when you're done, you're off the air, you're not recording, you're not doing interviews, and you come home to your babies after covering a tragedy, I can't imagine what that's like and the appreciation you have for life and what God has given you when you moments ago have talked to families who won't be able to do the same.
It's excruciating because you feel the joy and relief that your family is still intact. But that also makes the pain so great because you recognize the loss. And when we're out there covering stories, it's not our job to fall apart. It's our job to tell the story and to let the people we interview have a voice and tell their stories. And if I fall apart or lose my composure, suddenly then I'm the story, or I'm somehow inserting myself. And it's not about my grief, it's about theirs. And so I try really hard to maintain that composure, although sometimes it's really hard because, going to a place like Uvalde or Newtown, I mean, those stories are crushing. They're just crushing. I almost lost it when I was in Uvalde and was talking about a little girl whose parents I met who was supposed to read a verse in Sunday school before the whole church on Sunday. I mean, that crushed me to imagine this little sweet girl who was just looking forward to getting to speak in church. And why was she shot and killed in her first grade classroom? That will just never make any sense to me whatsoever. So it's really hard to kind of hold all those things at the same time. And you could be overwhelmed by your despair and overwhelmed by your grief, and it could make you cynical. But that's not what we're called to do. I think we're called to have vulnerable and tender hearts, because if we do, then that means that we can respond, and we can respond with love and minister to not just ourselves, but to those around us. And it's really hard to do. I'm telling you this from an intellectual place. I find this very hard to do in real life, because I find it's so hard to, when you love someone, and maybe you've experienced this in your life, like maybe your mom has a problem or your child. I almost sometimes feel like I feel more distance because I simply cannot bear their pain. Like it's so unbearable that I almost have to put a distance. But what people need in those moments, and I think what I need in those moments when I'm in pain, is not for someone to try to fix it or to be clinical about it or be at a distance or be calm, steady presence. And I think actually our faith teaches us this. Jesus teaches us this. In those moments, you need someone actually to kind of cry with you.
Yeah.
In modern days, we would call that kind of co-regulating, right? To just like sit in that grief with you. Just be like, oh man, that hurts. I'm so sorry that happened. And sometimes it's just being heard that is so transformative. And it's God who is quite good at that. And you look in the Bible, Jesus wept. I mean, Jesus was crying all the time. And why? Because, as I've heard it said, this is not my quote, it's a ministry of tears. It's a ministry of presence. And I can't explain why that is so powerful, but it is. It's powerful to receive it, and it's powerful when we can do it. But to do it, we have to remain vulnerable. And I'm the first to acknowledge that that's really hard in general. And it's really hard for me in particular, because I try so hard to have that core of toughness and protection and, you know, I'll try to have that thick skin. And I don't actually think we're supposed to.
Yeah, I remember I've heard you say in the past you had this hard exterior, and then when you became a mom, that began to break a bit. And I know you had a moment with a parent after the Sandy Hook massacre where you had an opportunity to share your faith. Were you nervous to talk to them about it? Was it just an organic moment? Can you take us there for a little bit?
Yeah, this is a woman named Nelma Marquez Green, and she's an incredible woman, an ambassador for faith. She lost her little girl, 6-year-old Anna Grace, in Newtown, a first grade girl. And I remember seeing a 60 Minutes profile. I think it was like a 5-year after Sandy Hook piece. And they interviewed a lot of different families who were dealing with that grief in different ways. And the Marquez Greens were just one of those families. But the interviewer noticed that they were a family of faith. And he sat down and he said to her, "And what about that faith now? How can you still have faith?" And she said, "When I get to heaven, I want to hear 2 things. I want to hear, 'Well done, my good and faithful servant.' And I want to hear, 'Hi, Mom.'"
Jeez.
And I sat at home watching that. And I didn't even have kids at that point. I was so struck by the beauty of that statement. I was blown away by her faith in the face of the unimaginable. I never forgot that. And years later, I mean, it must have been at least 10 years since that, I was thinking about it as I was writing this book. And I was writing a book that was so hopeful and full of love, but I couldn't stop thinking about people like Nelba and people like those families in Uvalde and people who had suffered so greatly. And I thought about them reading a book like this. I thought about people who were born in another country with terrible disfigurement or terrible disease or something that they no way could have earned or deserved, just total unmerited suffering. And I thought about them reading a book like this and how would they receive a book like this? And I was horrified. And so I did something I never thought I would do, which was I reached out to Nelba as a stranger and asked if we could meet. I told her a little bit about the book. I sent her the first few chapters so she would understand where I was coming from. And she agreed. And we met in person and we had lunch. And she was amazing. And I still can't believe she did. And she said, "You can ask me anything." And she told me a lot about how she held on to faith. One of the things she said was, she said, I read about it in the book and it was like so profound. I didn't want to put it in the book, but I asked her permission and she said, "No, you should," because it was so personal. She told me that one day she was at one of her lowest moments and she was on her knees and she was praying and she said, "I would do anything, God. I would do anything. I would give my soul to the devil to see my daughter one more time." And she was crying. And she fell then into a deep sleep. And she had a dream, which when I heard it, I said, this sounds like an Old Testament vision to me. But she had a dream that she saw Anna Grace. She saw her again, but there was no God. And when she woke up, she knew that she could not live in a world like that. That though she wanted more than anything to see her baby girl again, she could not live in a world where there was no God. And so she moved forward knowing that this life of missing and longing and grief, this was the life that she was going to have to walk. But that her belief in God enabled her to say the words that I heard on that interview, that one day she would be able to say or to hear, "Hi, Mom," because of this God that she so deeply believes in. But that's a hard-won faith. That is, as her pastor said at the funeral for Anna Grace, a gutsy, robust, rugged faith. That's not a faith of bumper stickers. That is a hard-won faith. That is a faith that you fight for every day, and she does. And for her to sit and share that with me and be willing for me to share that publicly just shows, I always say to her, you're a personification of the triumph of good over evil.
What a wonderful woman. Holy cow. I want that kind of faith. I think we all can strive for that. I want to be respectful of your time. So just a few more questions.
Sure.
I know, and I've also read, but I especially know that your colleagues would say the same thing about you. They would say many great things, but they would say that you lead with your faith. And I think sometimes Christians do a bad job of accepting people that don't think the same way we think. We just sometimes don't do a good job. But yet, here I am prepping for this interview and just being a fan of the Today Show watching. You're promoting your book, and it was different than just talking about something that you wanted people to buy. You're at this, I believe it was a church, and you've got all the anchors and correspondents up there, and it was just a beautiful conversation about faith. Not everybody's on the same page, but yet everybody had a story about Savannah. One of them stood out to me, especially, and it was your colleague, Craig Melvin, whose brother had passed away. And there you were with him in his dressing room, offering to pray with him and let him know that you were there. Is that easy for you to do now? Is that kind of where you're at faith-wise, or was that something that felt vulnerable for you?
In that moment, I was really afraid because Craig had lost his brother, but he had just gotten the call, so he was at work. And our producer called me and told me, Craig just got this news, he's going home. And you don't know what exactly to do in that moment. Sure. Because you don't want to intrude. You don't want to make someone look you in the eye when they don't want to be with anyone. But at the same time, I just felt like I just want to go put my arms around him. I won't even look at him. I'll just put my arms around him. So I was really scared to do it. I knocked on his door. He was still there. I hugged him. We cried, and I just said a prayer for him. But what I mostly said was, he's not alone. I know you wonder where Lawrence is right now. He's not alone. He's with his Lord and Savior. And that was our moment. And it's just really sweet memory between Craig and me that he has shared, which is why I feel comfortable sharing it. But, it's funny, here I wrote this book about faith, but I kind of joke about it. I'm like, okay, I wrote the book and now I'm listening to go back to our regular programming, and I'm not going into hibernation. I'm the same as I always was, but I'm not sitting here putting Bible verses on social media, and I'm not trying to go be like a professional proselytizer. I'm not out here to persuade, as I've said 1,000 times. I'm certainly not trying to say like I've got it all made or figured out, or I'm some good person. On the contrary, if anything, this whole experience has made it more real to me, just how flawed I am and what a mess, what a total mess, and how much I need God and how much I need to just dip into those resources of God's love all the time. So when it comes to talking to other people about it, if they want to talk to me about it, I want to hear. And actually, one of the coolest things about this experience of writing the book is that people, when it's been shocking, but also so wonderful, people want to talk about faith, and not just people who share the same faith, not people who have any faith at all. Yes, people in New York City. Yes, people in Washington, D.C. Not just people in Nashville, people in L.A. People yearn to talk about things that matter. And whether you believe in God or not, everyone wrestles with that central question. And most humans are deeply interested in it and have something they want to say. And for writing this book, I think now people know that that's a conversation I like to have too. So the conversations I've had with people from all walks of life in situations that aren't in any way religious or faith-based, but quite secular, that's the conversation I continue to have over and over again. And it's so neat. And it's neat to be listening too, and what I'm getting out of it, and people of different faiths telling me what different texts mean something to them. And it's just been incredible. So I return to that word gentle. We should be gentle not only in sharing our faith, but also gentle in hearing and listening to people, because what we're called to do is love. And I just read this quote, which I'll screw up. It's not my quote, but I just read it and I was like, oh man, this is one of the most earth-shattering, most beautiful quotes I ever heard. That being listened to is so close to the feeling of being loved that for most average people, it's totally indistinguishable. And I think as Christians, we need to listen more than we need to talk. And when you listen and you hear the stories of people's hearts, then you're loving them. They will feel loved. They will feel heard. They will feel seen. And then, of course, they will feel an experience of God. And I think that's the discipleship that we're called to. I think that's what we're meant to do. I think that's how we're supposed to spread the fragrance of God everywhere, by loving one another. And we love not by saying, you are loved, or holding up pamphlets, although that's fine, because for some people, that's what they need. And you got to give God the space to work in all different ways, in all different voices, through a song or a sunset or a pamphlet or a Jesus Saves placard at a football game. You got to give God all the space and running room in the world. He's God, you're not. We just need to know that what we're mostly supposed to do is soak in and be transformed by this love that we see in God. Love for our feelings, love for our sins, not our sins, but forgiveness of our sins, and then spread that around. When we do, it's irresistible. We don't really have to say anything.
You're doing it, Savannah. Listen instead of just talking. Listen instead of just talking. So many times I'm around people and they're like, oh, Jason, yeah. How you doing? I'm like, I'm great. How are you doing? Blessed and highly favored. And they say all these sayings and they feel like they have to say. I'm like, are you even human? You sound like a robot right now.
Yeah. Like, is that for real?
Yeah. Is that real? I can't relate to that at all. So it makes me immediately uncomfortable. It's not relatable to people who don't think like we believe, or I kind of break down, and I go back to your story of just being the colleague and the friend, more importantly than just being a colleague, the friend that you are to people, a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on. It speaks highly of who you are. Your children are sick, so I will let you return to them. I didn't ask you much, but before we go, how are you introducing faith to Vale and Charlie? What's that experience been like for you?
Well, I think it's probably my most important job, right up there with teaching them to say please and thank you and don't pick your nose at the table and all those things that you want your kids to bring into the world. But especially as an older mom, it means so much to me to try to share with them this God that I know, because I know that I won't always be with them. I don't want to be a parent that's the be all end all of their life. They need more than me. They need me. They need their dad. But they need their community, they need Jesus, they need God, they need love, they need all of these things to flourish. And so for me, sharing faith and hoping they catch it is super important, because I believe that will always be with them, that they can carry with them everywhere. And how do I do it? I don't know. I don't know if I'm even doing it right. You know, you mentioned it. My sister says that God was the sixth member of our family. And yes, we were a churchy family when I was little. There were 5 of us Guthries, and that's why she says God was the sixth member. I mean, we went to church all the time. We were kind of devout for a moment there. But that's not what she meant. What she meant is that God was always in the conversation. When we ran into a problem or encounter, or if we had an issue, if there was a challenge, my parents would say, well, should we sit here and pray about it? God was always being talked about. And I try to copy that in our own household. You know, I live in an interfaith household. My husband is Jewish. So what we try to do is expose them. I feel my job is to tell them about the God that I know. I know that when they grow up and they get older, they will choose for themselves. Of course, I hope that they choose the faith that means so much to me. But I have to leave that to God. You know, it's like, I know what I'm responsible for. I know the knowledge that I have. I know the importance of sharing that with them. And then I have to let God do the rest.
If you could ask God any question, what would it be, Savannah?
Oh gosh. Why did you bother?
Wow.
Like, why did you not just cut to the ending? You know, why did you start it? Like, I believe so much in how it will end. And I believe that God will redeem, every human heart and each soul, and that we're headed to a place, his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I believe all that. I truly believe it in my heart. But I do wonder, but what, you knew how much time and space and millennia and pain and suffering. You knew all that. So why did you start it? And I don't know the answer to that. My guess is that he would say, because the goodness was greater. There was more good than bad. There were more lives to be saved, more souls to hold, more love to share. I'm guessing. I'm just guessing that he bothered because he weighed those things. I don't know. It's not a very pat way to answer, but that's what it is. I'd ask a question that I really need the answer to.
Yeah,
I really
same.
need the answer. I'm just curious.
I'm with you. I appreciate you. You are refreshing to talk to, as always. I love your vulnerable side. I like that shell was cracked when your kids were born. This is what people relate to the most. You're an incredible mom and colleague and friend. And this hour has been very profound and encouraging for me. And I know everybody listening. So thank you for your time. Go be with your babies.
Oh, I love you, Jason. Love
you,
Lauren.
Savannah.
And I'm happy to be with you. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. Hopefully I'll see you soon in person, okay?
Yeah, I love it.